Hi, I'm Emma Rodriguez, and last Tuesday my mother told me my wedding ideas were embarrassing to the family name, while sitting in the most expensive wedding planning office in Scottsdale. What she didn't know was that the woman taking notes across from us had helped me become a millionaire 3 years ago, and was about to remind everyone in that room exactly who they were dealing with. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about growing up as the other daughter is that you learn to make yourself small without even realizing it. While my sister Jessica was getting her real estate license and posting Instagram photos from luxury open houses, I was working double shifts at Desert Brew Coffee and taking business classes at ASU that my parents called a backup plan. When Jessica closed her first $1 million home sale, we had a family dinner at Ruth's Chris. When I graduated summa cum laude with my business degree, my mom picked up takeout from Chipotle and said we'd celebrate when I got a real job. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in Phoenix. The desert sun was already brutal by 8 a.m., and I was running late for my shift at the coffee shop after staying up until 3 working on my online business. My parents still thought I just sold random stuff on the internet as a side hustle. They had no idea that my e-commerce company had generated over $2 million in revenue last year, or that I employed 12 people remotely, or that the reason I still lived in my tiny Tempe apartment wasn't because I couldn't afford better, but because I was reinvesting everything back into growth. I pulled into the parking lot of Desert Brew, my beat-up Honda Civic looking pathetic next to the BMW and Mercedes that filled the Scottsdale locations where the real money congregated. Inside, the familiar smell of espresso and pastries wrapped around me like a comfort blanket. This job had been my lifeline through college, and even though I didn't need it anymore, I kept working here because Maya Chen, the owner, had believed in me when nobody else did. Plus, it gave me the perfect cover story. As far as my family knew, Emma the barista was exactly who I was supposed to be. "You look like you've been up all night again," Maya said, tying her apron behind the counter. She was the only person in my life who knew the truth about my business, mainly because she'd watched me take customer service calls during my breaks and noticed when I started paying for my own health insurance. "New product launch," I said, grabbing my name tag. "The meditation app market is insane right now. We're white labeling guided meditation content for wellness coaches, and the demand is through the roof." Quote, Maya shook her head with that proud but worried look she always gave me. "Emma, you're making more money than most people see in 5 years. Why are you still here?" It was a question I asked myself daily, especially when my mother would drive by in her Range Rover and wave at me through the window like I was some charity case she was checking on. The answer was complicated. Partly it was because this job was my anchor to the person I used to be, before the money and the success and the constant pressure to prove myself. Partly it was because I wasn't ready for my family to know the truth. And partly, it was because I genuinely loved the simple routine of making coffee for people who needed their morning fix. The morning rush was typical for a Tuesday. Lawyers heading to court, real estate agents preparing for showings, stay-at-home moms treating themselves after dropping kids at school. I was in my element, muscle memory taking over as I crafted drink after drink, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Wedding planning appointment moved to 2 p.m. today. Wear something appropriate. We're meeting at Sterling Events." My stomach dropped. Sterling Events was the most exclusive wedding planning firm in the Valley, the kind of place where consultations started at $5,000, and the waiting list was 6 months long. I had no idea how my mother had gotten us an appointment, and I definitely couldn't afford their services. David and I had talked about a simple ceremony at one of the resort hotels, maybe 100 guests, nothing too elaborate. My mother had other ideas. Ever since David proposed 3 months ago, every conversation with my family had become a comparison between my upcoming wedding and Jessica's elaborate affair 2 years prior. Jessica had married her college boyfriend Marcus in a ceremony at the Desert Botanical Garden that cost more than most people's houses. 300 guests, a live mariachi band, flowers flown in from Ecuador, and a reception that lasted until 2 in the morning. The photos had been featured in Phoenix Magazine's Society section, and my mother still kept copies in her purse to show strangers. "What time do you need to leave?" Maya asked, noticing my expression. 1:30. "I have to go home and change into something that won't embarrass the Rodriguez family name." I tried to keep my voice light, but Maya caught the bitterness. Want me to come with you? Moral support? I considered it. Maya had met my family exactly once, at my college graduation, and had later described my mother as a woman who treats kindness like weakness. Having her there would definitely make the appointment more bearable, but it would also mean explaining to my mother why I needed emotional backup for wedding planning. Thanks, but I think I need to handle this one solo. The rest of my shift crawled by. Every time I glanced at the clock, my anxiety ratcheted up another notch. By the time I clocked out at 1, my hands were shaking as I untied my apron. I drove home to my apartment complex, a modest place near the ASU campus where most of the residents were either students or young professionals just starting out. My neighbors had no idea that the girl in apartment 3B, who drove the old Honda and worked at a coffee shop, was probably worth more than all of them combined. In my bedroom, I stared at my closet trying to decode my mother's definition of appropriate. Too casual, and I'd be lectured about not taking my wedding seriously. Too nice, and she'd ask where I got the money for expensive clothes. I settled on a black wrap dress I'd bought at Target 2 years ago, and the pearl earrings Abuela Rosa had left me. Simple, respectful, invisible. Sterling Events occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming office building in Old Town Scottsdale, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Camelback Mountain. The reception area looked like something out of Architectural Digest. All white marble and fresh orchids and furniture that probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months. I checked in with the receptionist, a perfectly polished woman who looked like she'd never had a hair out of place in her life. Emma Rodriguez for the 2 o'clock with Victoria Sterling, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Of course. Ms. Sterling is just finishing up with another client. Your mother is already here. I found my mother in the waiting area, scrolling through her phone with the focused intensity she usually reserved for finding other people's social media mistakes. Patricia Rodriguez was a woman who had built her entire identity around appearances. At 52, she maintained the kind of polished perfection that required weekly salon appointments and a personal trainer. Today she wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's rent, and her dark hair was pulled back in the kind of sleek chignon that looked effortless but took an hour to achieve. Emma, she said without looking up, you're 5 minutes late. Traffic on the 101, I lied, settling into the chair beside her. She finally glanced at me, her eyes doing that quick assessment she always performed. That dress is fine, I suppose. At least, it's not one of those casual outfits you usually wear. I bit back my response. The casual outfits she was referring to were my work clothes, the uniform of someone who spent 8 hours a day on her feet, serving coffee to people who could afford to spend $6 on a latte without thinking about it. But in my mother's world, appearance was everything, and my job was a constant source of embarrassment. I brought my wedding planning binder, she continued, pulling out a thick folder covered in magazine clippings and sticky notes. I've been researching venues, florists, photographers. We'll need to move quickly if we want to book anything decent for next spring. I stared at the binder, which was easily 3 inches thick. Mom? David and I haven't even talked about a budget yet. We're thinking something simple, maybe at one of the resort hotels. Simple? She repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Emma, this is your wedding, your one chance to show the world what the Rodriguez family represents. We can't have simple. Before I could respond, a woman emerged from one of the inner offices. She was tall and elegant, probably in her early 40s, with silver-streaked blonde hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. She wore a navy blue dress that managed to be both professional and creative, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Victoria Sterling. So wonderful to meet you. My mother stood immediately, switching into her social mode. Patricia Rodriguez, and this is my daughter Emma. We're so excited to work with you. I've heard incredible things about your firm. Victoria's gaze shifted to me, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. Recognition? Confusion? It was gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. Emma, she said, extending her hand. What a pleasure. Her handshake was firm, confident, the grip of someone who had built something from nothing, and knew her own worth. As our hands touched, I felt that same spark of recognition, but I couldn't place where I might have met her before. "Please come into my office," Victoria said, gesturing toward the door she'd emerged from. Her office was stunning, all clean lines and natural light, with a sitting area that looked out over the Scottsdale mountains. The walls were covered with photos from weddings she'd planned, each one more beautiful than the last. Couples laughing on beaches, dancing under string lights, cutting elaborate cakes in gardens that looked like fairy tales. But what caught my attention was her desk, where I could see the edge of a laptop covered in stickers from various business conferences and a coffee mug that said, "Boss Lady." "So," Victoria said, settling into her chair across from us, "tell me about your vision for the wedding." My mother immediately launched into her prepared presentation, pulling photos and magazine clippings from her binder with the efficiency of a seasoned prosecutor presenting evidence. "We're thinking spring ceremony, probably April or May. Jessica, my older daughter, had her wedding at the Desert Botanical Garden, which was absolutely gorgeous. But we want something even more spectacular for Emma. Maybe the Four Seasons, or the Phoenician Resort. 300 guests minimum. Full Catholic ceremony, mariachi band for the reception." I watched Victoria's face as my mother spoke, noticing how she nodded politely but kept glancing at me, as if waiting for me to contribute. When my mother paused to flip through her binder, Victoria turned to me directly. "And what about you, Emma? What's your vision for your special day?" It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked me what I wanted? Not what would look good for the family, not what would impress the neighbors, not what would photograph well for social media. Just what I wanted. I started, then stopped. My mother was staring at me with that warning look she'd perfected over the years. The one that said, "Don't embarrass us." I think something elegant but not too elaborate. David and I are both pretty low-key people. "Low-key?" my mother repeated with a laugh that had sharp edges. "Emma, sweetheart, this isn't a backyard barbecue. This is your wedding. The most important day of your life." Victoria's pen was poised over her notepad, but she hadn't written anything down yet. "What does low-key mean to you, Emma?" The question was asked gently, but I could sense there was more behind it, as if she was giving me permission to speak honestly. "Maybe 100 guests instead of 300, I said carefully. "Somewhere beautiful but not ostentatious. Good food, good music, but focused on celebrating with the people we love rather than putting on a show." My mother's face was already changing, that familiar tightness around her eyes that meant I was disappointing her. "Emma, we've been over this. The Rodriguez family has a reputation to maintain. When people think of our weddings, they think of Jessica's beautiful ceremony. We can't follow that with something modest." The way she said modest made it sound like a disease. Victoria set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Can I ask you both something? What does this wedding represent to you?" "It represents the union of two families," my mother said immediately. "It's a celebration of love, yes, but it's also a reflection of our values, our success, our place in the community. People will remember this wedding for years." "And for you, Emma?" I looked at my mother, then back at Victoria. Something in her expression encouraged me to be honest. "It represents the beginning of my life with David. The people who matter most to us. Witnessing us promise to build something beautiful together." The silence that followed was heavy. My mother's face had gone through several emotions before settling on barely controlled frustration. "See? This is exactly what I was worried about," she said to Victoria, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "Emma has always been practical, to a fault. She's never understood the importance of presentation, of making an impression. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She works at a coffee shop, for heaven's sake. She drives a car that's older than some of her coworkers. I'm trying to help her understand that this wedding is her chance to show people she's more than that." Each word landed like a small slap. Victoria's expression remained neutral, professional, but I caught something flickering in her eyes. Anger? Sympathy? Mrs. Rodriguez, Victoria said carefully. I've planned weddings for clients with every budget imaginable. Some of the most beautiful ceremonies I've coordinated have been intimate affairs with 50 guests. The size of the wedding doesn't determine its significance. Of course not, my mother said, but her tone suggested she disagreed entirely. But we're not talking about just any couple here. We're talking about the Rodriguez family. Emma's sister Jessica had a wedding that was featured in Phoenix magazine. How would it look if Emma's wedding was smaller? Victoria turned to me. Emma, what's your budget for this wedding? The question I'd been dreading. My mother and I had never actually discussed numbers. Partly because I'd been afraid to find out what she expected me to spend, and partly because I wasn't sure how to explain my financial situation without revealing everything. We haven't really settled on a specific amount, I said weakly. Well, obviously, we'll need to invest appropriately, my mother interjected. I'm thinking somewhere in the $70,000 to $80,000 range. Maybe more, depending on the venue. I felt the blood drain from my face. $70,000 to $80,000. For one day. I could afford it, technically. But the idea of spending that much money on a single event made me physically ill. That was more than most people made in 2 years. That's a significant investment, I managed. Emma, my mother said, and her voice had taken on that patronizing tone she used when she thought I was being naive. You can't have a beautiful wedding on a shoestring budget. Good vendors cost money. Good venues cost money. If you want something that reflects well on our family, you need to be prepared to invest in it. Victoria was watching this exchange with careful attention, her professional mask still in place but something shifting underneath. What if we looked at some options across different price points? She suggested. I can show you venues and vendors that might work for various budgets. Absolutely, my mother said, pulling out her phone. I actually have some photos I wanted to show you from Jessica's wedding. You know, to give you a sense of our family's style. As my mother scrolled through her photo album, providing detailed commentary on every aspect of Jessica's wedding, I found myself studying Victoria. There was something familiar about her, something that nagged at the edge of my memory. The way she held herself, confident but not arrogant. The way she listened, really listened, when people spoke. The business conference stickers on her laptop. And then it hit me. 3 years ago, I'd attended a digital marketing conference in Las Vegas. It was one of my first major investments in my business education, back when I was still figuring out how to scale my e-commerce operation. I'd been nervous, intimidated by all the successful entrepreneurs and established business owners. During one of the lunch breaks, I'd been sitting alone at a table, reviewing my notes, when someone had asked if they could join me. Victoria Sterling, not a wedding planner then, but a business consultant specializing in helping women launch service-based companies. We'd talked for an hour about everything from customer acquisition costs to profit margins to the challenges of building a business while everyone around you expected you to fail. She'd given me her card and told me to email her if I ever needed advice. I'd taken her up on that offer. Over the next 6 months, we'd exchanged dozens of emails. She'd helped me optimize my website, refine my marketing strategy, and most importantly, develop the confidence to think bigger. When my business hit its first 6-figure year, I'd sent her a thank you email with a Starbucks gift card. When it hit 7 figures, I'd sent a bottle of champagne, but that had been over a year ago. I'd assumed she was still doing business consulting. I had no idea she'd transitioned into wedding planning. Emma? Emma, are you listening? My mother's voice snapped me back to the present. She was holding her phone toward me, showing me a photo of Jessica cutting her wedding cake. Sorry, I was just taking it all in. Victoria's eyes met mine across the desk, and I saw the exact moment when she made the same connection I had. Her professional composure slipped for just a fraction of a second, and she smiled. Not the polite customer service smile she'd been wearing since we arrived, but a real smile. One that said, "I remember you too." Well, Victoria said, closing her notebook, I think we have a good foundation to work with. Why don't I put together some preliminary proposals for you to review? Different options at different price points, so you can see what might work best for your vision and budget. That sounds perfect, my mother said, already standing. When can we expect to hear from you? I'll have something for you by Friday, Victoria said, walking us toward the door. Emma, do you have a card? I'd like to send the proposals directly to you as well, since this is your wedding. I almost laughed. A business card. I had business cards for my e-commerce company, beautiful ones printed on thick cardstock with my logo and title, Emma Rodriguez, founder and CEO. But I couldn't exactly hand that to Victoria in front of my mother. "I'll just give you my email," I said, writing it on the back of one of Victoria's business cards. As we walked toward the elevator, my mother was already making plans. "I'm thinking we should start looking at dresses this weekend, and we'll need to narrow down the guest list. Have you thought about your bridesmaids?" I nodded and made appropriate responses, but my mind was elsewhere. Victoria Sterling had helped me build $1 million business, and my mother had just spent an hour telling her that I was an embarrassment to the family name who worked at a coffee shop and didn't understand the importance of making a good impression. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. The elevator doors closed, and I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Emma Rodriguez, the disappointing daughter who needed her mother's help to plan a respectable wedding. If only she knew that the woman taking notes about flower arrangements and catering menus had once emailed me to congratulate me on being featured in Entrepreneur magazine as one of 30 under 30 e-commerce success stories. As we walked through the parking garage, my mother was still talking about venue options and photographer recommendations, but I was thinking about something else entirely. About the moment when Victoria Sterling would sit down to write our proposal and realize exactly who she was dealing with. About the conversation we would inevitably have to have. About the choice I was going to have to make between the life my family thought I was living and the life I had actually built. "Emma, are you even listening to me?" "Sorry, Mom. Just thinking about everything we need to do." "Well, don't think too hard," she said, unlocking her Range Rover. "Just trust me to guide you through this. I know what I'm doing." As I watched her drive away, I pulled out my phone and stared at Victoria's business card. On the back, where I'd written my email address, she'd written something else. Just 2 words. "Call me." I sat in my Honda for a long time, air conditioning blasting against the desert heat, thinking about the conversation that was about to change everything. Victoria's text arrived at 7:30 the next morning, while I was getting ready for another shift at Desert Brew. 3 words that made my stomach flip. "We need to talk." I stared at the message, knowing exactly what conversation was waiting for me. The carefully constructed walls between my 2 lives were about to come crashing down, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the aftermath. But first, I had to get through another day of pretending to be the person my family thought I was. The coffee shop was already busy when I arrived, the morning rush in full swing. Maya took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. She had that intuitive ability to read people that made her such a good business owner, the same skill that had helped her build Desert Brew from a single location into a small chain across the valley. "Wedding planning didn't go well yesterday?" she asked, handing me my apron. "It went exactly as expected," I said, tying it around my waist. My mother spent an hour explaining to the wedding planner why I'm a disappointment to the family name. Maya winced. "What did the planner say?" That was the $1 million question, literally. "Nothing yet, but she wants to talk." The morning passed in a blur of espresso shots and small talk with customers. Around 10, during a brief lull, my phone buzzed with another message from Victoria. "Are you free for lunch? I have some interesting proposals to discuss." I showed the text to Maya, who raised an eyebrow. "Interesting proposals? That's what I'm afraid of." Maya glanced around the nearly empty shop. "Go. I can handle the lunch rush alone. You need to deal with this before it eats you alive." An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Victoria Sterling at a small cafe in Old Town Scottsdale, far enough from both my workplace and her office that we were unlikely to run into anyone from my family. She'd traded her professional wedding planner attire for jeans and a casual blazer, but she still carried herself with that confident air that had impressed me at the business conference 3 years ago. "Emma Rodriguez," she said, shaking her head with a smile. "I have to admit, when you walked into my office yesterday, it took me a few minutes to place you. The last time we spoke, you were telling me about hitting your first million in revenue." I felt heat creep up my neck. "Yeah, about that. My family doesn't exactly know about the business." Victoria's expression shifted from amused to concerned. "They don't know you own a company? They think I sell random stuff online as a side hustle. They have no idea about the revenue, the employees, any of it." I picked at my salad, suddenly not hungry. To them, I'm just Emma, who works at a coffee shop and can't figure out how to make something of herself. Emma? Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. You built a $2 million business before you turned 25. You're employing 12 people. You were featured in Entrepreneur magazine. Why are you hiding that? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for months. The answer was complicated, rooted in years of being told I wasn't enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't ambitious enough. Because the moment they find out, everything changes. Right now, I'm the disappointment, but I'm their disappointment. The second they know about the money, I become something else entirely. Either they'll want to control it, or they'll find ways to diminish it, or they'll suddenly decide, I've been selfish for not helping more with family expenses. Victoria nodded slowly. And your fiancé? Does David know? David knows everything. He's actually been pushing me to tell my family, but he doesn't understand the dynamics. His family celebrates success. Mine weaponizes it. That explains yesterday, Victoria said. Your mother spent an hour telling me how you needed guidance because you don't understand quality or presentation, while I'm sitting there knowing you've built one of the most successful e-commerce operations I've ever consulted on. I laughed, but it came out bitter. What did you think when she said I work at a coffee shop like it was some kind of character flaw? I thought about the emails you sent me when you were scaling up. How you agonized over every hire, every business decision because you wanted to create something sustainable and ethical. How you spent weeks researching the best health insurance options for your employees before you even had health insurance yourself. Victoria paused. Your mother doesn't know who you are at all, does she? The words hit harder than I expected. No. She knows who she thinks I should be, and she knows who she wishes I was, but she doesn't know who I actually am. Victoria pulled out a folder from her bag. Well, this creates an interesting situation. Because I did prepare wedding proposals for you, as promised, but I prepared them for 2 different clients. She opened the folder and slid 2 bound presentations across the table. The first was elegant but simple, titled Intimate Elegance, the Rodriguez Wedding. The second was significantly thicker, with gold foil lettering, Luxury Legacy, a celebration worthy of your success. The first one, Victoria said, tapping the smaller proposal, is based on what your mother thinks you can afford. Modest venue, basic package, nice but not extravagant. About $30,000 total. I flipped through the pages. It was beautiful, actually. A boutique hotel in Scottsdale. Garden ceremony. Reception for 100 guests. Simple flowers, good food, professional photography. Everything David and I had talked about wanting. The second one, Victoria continued, is based on what I know you can actually afford. I opened the larger proposal and immediately understood why it was so thick. The Phoenician Resort, but not just any package. The presidential suite for getting ready. Ceremony in the resort's private desert garden. Reception in the ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. A menu designed by their executive chef. Flowers by the same designer who did events for Phoenix's mayor. A 12-piece band. And photography by someone whose work I recognized from celebrity weddings. The price tag at the back made me blink. $120,000. Victoria, this is beautiful, but I could buy a house for this much money. You could buy a house with cash and still have money left over, she corrected. Emma, I've seen your financials. This wedding represents less than 6% of your annual revenue. I stared at the proposals, feeling overwhelmed. But what's the point of spending this much money on one day? Maybe there isn't one, Victoria said. Or maybe the point is that you get to choose. For the first time in your life, you get to decide what your wedding looks like without worrying about what you can afford or what other people expect. You get to choose based purely on what would make you happy. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and I felt my usual Pavlovian response of anxiety mixed with dread. I should take this, I said apologetically. Emma, darling. My mother's voice was honey-sweet, which usually meant she wanted something. I've been thinking about yesterday's meeting, and I realized we never really discussed your dress budget. My dress budget? For your wedding gown, sweetheart. I know you're used to shopping at more. Economical stores, but your wedding dress is not the place to cut corners. I'm thinking we should plan on at least $5,000, maybe more, depending on what we find. $5,000 for a dress I would wear for 8 hours. I thought about the last dress I'd bought, a simple black number from Target that had cost $38 and looked perfectly fine. Mom, I'm not sure I need to spend $5,000 on a dress. Emma, the honey was already turning to vinegar. This is exactly what I was talking about yesterday. You don't understand how these things work. A cheap dress looks cheap in photos. And photos last forever. Victoria was watching my face, and I could see her understanding exactly what was happening. The casual dismissal, the implication that I didn't understand quality, the assumption that I couldn't afford anything better anyway. I'll think about it, I said finally. Don't think too long. The good designers book up quickly, and we're already behind schedule. Jessica had her dress ordered 6 months before her wedding. After I hung up, Victoria leaned back in her chair. Let me guess. Your sister's dress cost more than $5,000. $12,000, I said automatically. Custom Vera Wang, flown in from New York for fittings. And now your mother is trying to manage your expectations downward, while making you feel guilty about not understanding the importance of quality. It was such an accurate summary of the conversation that I almost laughed. You should consider a career in family therapy. I've planned enough weddings to recognize the patterns, Victoria said dryly. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Mom told me about your wedding budget meeting. Just remember that not everyone can have a magazine-worthy wedding. The important thing is that you're happy. I showed the text to Victoria, who read it and shook her head. Wow. She managed to sound supportive while being completely condescending. It's a family talent, I said. Jessica's actually the nicer one. She doesn't mean to be patronizing, she just genuinely believes that I'm not capable of more. Emma, can I ask you something personal? I nodded. When you first started your business, what was the hardest part? The actual work? Or dealing with people who didn't believe you could succeed? The question caught me off guard, but the answer was immediate. The people. The work was challenging, but it was solvable. Figure out the right products, optimize the website, improve the marketing. But constantly defending my decisions to people who assumed I didn't know what I was doing? That was exhausting. And now? Now I have 12 employees who depend on me, clients all over the country, and revenue that grows every quarter. But I still come home to family dinners where my mother asks when I'm going to get a real job. Victoria closed both proposal folders and leaned forward. Emma, I want to tell you something, and I want you to really hear me. In my 15 years of business consulting, I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs. You are in the top 5%. Not just in terms of revenue, but in terms of strategic thinking, ethical leadership, and sustainable growth. The business you built is remarkable. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, which was embarrassing. Thank you. I'm not saying it to be nice. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I think you've spent so long hiding your success that you've started to forget how significant it is. Victoria paused. But I also understand why you're hiding it. Families can be complicated when it comes to money and success. My phone rang again. Maya this time. Emma, you need to get back here. Your sister just showed up looking for you, and she seems upset about something. My stomach dropped. Jessica never came to the coffee shop. In the 3 years I'd worked there, she'd maybe stopped by twice, both times when she was in the area for real estate showings and needed to use the bathroom. I have to go, I told Victoria, already standing up. Emma, wait. Victoria handed me both proposal folders. Take these, look them over, and think about what you actually want, not what everyone else expects you to want. I drove back to Desert Brew with the proposals on my passenger seat, my mind racing. Whatever Jessica wanted, it couldn't be good. She only sought me out when there was family drama, and usually that meant I was somehow in the center of it. I found Jessica sitting at one of the corner tables, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee she clearly had no intention of drinking. She was dressed in her real estate uniform, Tailored blazer, pencil skirt, heels that probably cost more than I made in a week at the coffee shop. Everything about her screamed success, from her professionally styled hair to her designer handbag. "Emma," she said, standing up when she saw me, "we need to talk." Maya caught my eye from behind the counter and mouthed good luck before busying herself with inventory. "What's going on, Jess?" Jessica glanced around the coffee shop, taking in the mismatched furniture and the chalkboard menu and the general atmosphere of a place that prioritized function over form. "Can we go somewhere more private?" "There's an office in the back," I said, leading her through the employee area to Maya's small office behind the counter. Jessica perched on the edge of the desk chair, like she was afraid of getting coffee stains on her skirt. "Mom called me after she talked to you earlier. She's worried about you." "Worried about me?" "About the wedding. About your attitude towards spending money on it. She thinks you're going to embarrass the family with something cheap and tacky." I felt the familiar surge of anger mixed with hurt. "Jessica, what exactly did she say?" "She said you seemed resistant to investing in quality vendors, that you didn't understand the importance of presentation, that you were acting like someone who doesn't appreciate what she's trying to do for you." Jessica's voice was gentle, but the words still stung. "She's afraid you're going to have some kind of budget wedding that makes the family look bad. And what do you think?" Jessica was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "I think you're one of the most practical people I know, and practical people don't usually spend ridiculous amounts of money on one day. But Emma, this is your wedding. It's supposed to be special." "It will be special," I said. "It's the day I marry David. That's what makes it special, not how much money we spend on flowers." "But people will judge, Emma. They'll compare it to my wedding. And if yours looks lesser, it reflects on all of us." There it was, the real concern. Not my happiness, not my preferences, but how my choices would reflect on the family's reputation. "Jessica, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Are you happy? With Marcus? With your marriage? With your life?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that?" "Because you spent $60,000 on one day, and I'm trying to understand if it was worth it. If all the stress and planning and expense actually made you happier." Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "The wedding was beautiful. Everyone said so. The photos are gorgeous. The whole day was perfect." "That's not what I asked." "Emma, you're being weird. Of course I'm happy." But she couldn't quite meet my eyes when she said it. "Look," Jessica continued, "I didn't come here to debate the value of wedding spending. I came here because I'm worried about you. Mom says you're working too many hours at this place, that you seem stressed and tired all the time. She thinks maybe you're putting too much pressure on yourself to pay for this wedding." I almost laughed. If only she knew that the money for my wedding was sitting in investment accounts, earning interest while I decided what to do with it. "I'm fine, Jess, really." "Are you though? Because from the outside, it looks like you're struggling. Still living in that tiny apartment, still working at a coffee shop, driving that old car. I know you're proud, but if you need help with the wedding expenses, we're family. We can figure something out." The offer was genuine, I could tell. Jessica really thought she was being generous, offering to help her struggling little sister afford a decent wedding. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. "That's really kind of you," I said carefully. "But David and I can handle our wedding expenses." "Emma, there's no shame in accepting help. Marcus and I could contribute something. Mom and Dad obviously want to help too. We just want you to have a beautiful day." "What if I told you that money wasn't the issue? That I could afford any wedding I wanted?" Jessica smiled indulgently. "Emma, I know you work hard, and I know you're good at saving money. But there's a difference between being able to afford something and being able to comfortably afford something. You don't have to pretend with me. I'm not pretending." "Okay, but realistically, how much could you spend on a wedding without it being a financial strain? 10,000? 15? I stared at my sister, this woman who thought she knew me so well but didn't know me at all, who was offering to help pay for my wedding while sitting in an office building that I could buy with cash. "What if I said 100,000? Jessica laughed. "Emma, be serious." I am being serious. You work at a coffee shop. I also own a business. I know, the online thing. But that's just a side hustle, right? You sell things on eBay or whatever. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for my business accounts. Jessica had always been good with numbers, a skill that served her well in real estate. I turned the screen toward her. This is my business checking account. This is my business savings. These are my investment accounts. Jessica stared at the screen for a long moment, her expression changing from indulgent amusement to confusion to something that looked like shock. Emma, what am I looking at? You're looking at a business that generated $3 million in revenue last year and is on track to hit $3 million this year. The silence in the small office was deafening. Jessica looked from the phone screen to my face and back again, as if trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she thought she knew about my life. This is real? This is real. You're a millionaire? Technically, yes. Jessica sat back in the chair, looking stunned. Emma, what the hell? Why didn't you tell us? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one I wasn't sure I could answer without causing more hurt than healing. Because of this, I said finally. Because of conversations like the one we just had, where you assume I'm struggling and offer to help pay for my wedding. Because of family dinners, where Mom asks when I'm gonna get a real job. Because the moment you all find out about the money, I stop being Emma and I become Emma with money, and everything changes. But we're your family. We want to celebrate your success. Do you? Because when I graduated summa cum laude, nobody celebrated. When I got my business degree, Mom picked up Chipotle and said we'd celebrate when I got a real job. When I started my company, Dad asked when I was going to stop wasting time on hobbies and focus on my career. Jessica was quiet, and I could see her processing this information, trying to figure out how to respond. Emma, we didn't know. You never told us how successful the business was. I tried to. Remember when I mentioned that I'd hired my first employee? Mom said it was nice that I was helping someone else avoid getting a real job. When I told you about landing a major client, you said that was great, and then spent 20 minutes telling me about a house you'd sold. But that's because we thought it was small scale. If you'd known, what? You would have listened differently? You would have taken me seriously? Jessica, I shouldn't have to be a millionaire for my family to respect what I do. The truth hung between us like a weight. Jessica stood up and paced to the small window, looking out at the parking lot where her BMW sat next to my Honda. Mom is going to lose her mind, she said finally. That's why I haven't told her. Emma, you can't keep this secret forever, especially not now with the wedding planning. If you can afford to have any wedding you want, why are you letting Mom stress about budgets and worry about how things will look? It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with for weeks. Because the second I tell her, this wedding stops being about what David and I want, and becomes about what she thinks a millionaire's wedding should look like. It becomes about outdoing your wedding, about impressing people, about proving something to the community, and that's not what I want. Jessica turned back to face me. But what if you could have both? What if you could have the wedding you want, and have your family understand who you really are? I don't think that's possible. Why not? I thought about the conversation with Victoria, about the 2 different wedding proposals sitting in my car, about the choice between hiding who I was and dealing with the consequences of revealing it. Because this family doesn't celebrate quiet success, Jess. They celebrate visible success. They celebrate things that look impressive to other people. My business is successful, but it's not flashy. I work from home in my pajamas most days. I don't have a fancy office or expensive business lunches, or a title that sounds impressive at cocktail parties. And even if I did, Mom would find ways to diminish it or control it or make it about her. You don't know that. Don't I? Remember when you made your first big sale? Mom immediately started giving you advice about how to leverage it for better listings. When you bought your house, she spent 3 months redecorating it to her taste. When you got engaged, she took over your wedding planning. She can't celebrate other people's success without making it about herself. Jessica was quiet again, and I could see her thinking about what I'd said. When she spoke, her voice was softer. Emma, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how it felt from your perspective. I know you didn't. And I'm not trying to make you feel bad, I just need you to understand why this is complicated for me. So what are you going to do? About the wedding? About telling the family? I don't know yet. Jessica checked her phone and grimaced. I have to get back to work. I have a showing in 20 minutes. But Emma, whatever you decide to do, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. What you've built is incredible, and I'm sorry I didn't see it before. After she left, I sat alone in Maya's office for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Telling Jessica had been easier than I'd expected, but it had also raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. Questions about what I owed my family, about what kind of wedding I actually wanted, about whether it was possible to have an honest relationship with people who had spent years not seeing me clearly. Maya knocked on the door frame. Everything okay back here? My sister just found out I'm not the struggling barista she thought I was. How'd she take it? Better than I expected. But now she wants me to tell the rest of the family. Maya sat down across from me. What do you want to do? I want to go home, order pizza, and pretend this whole conversation never happened. That sounds like avoidance. It is avoidance, but sometimes avoidance is a survival strategy. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. How did the sister conversation go? I stared at the message, realizing that my two worlds were colliding faster than I could control them. Victoria knew about my business success, Jessica now knew about it, and somehow my wedding had become the catalyst for everything coming to light. Maya, what would you do if your family spent years treating you like a disappointment and then suddenly found out you were more successful than any of them? Honestly, I'd probably enjoy watching them scramble to adjust their attitudes. That's terrible. Maybe, but it's also human. Emma, you've spent years making yourself smaller to accommodate their expectations. Maybe it's time to stop. As I drove home that evening, Victoria's proposals on my passenger seat, I thought about what Maya had said, about making myself smaller, about accommodating other people's expectations, about the difference between being kind and being a doormat. My phone rang as I was pulling into my apartment complex. David's name on the screen, and I felt a wave of relief. If anyone could help me figure out this mess, it was him. Hey babe, how was your day? Complicated, I said, gathering the proposals and my purse. My sister found out about the business. How'd that happen? Long story. Are you free for dinner? I need to talk through some things. Always free for you. Want me to pick up Thai food? Perfect. See you in an hour. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I realized that Jessica's visit had shifted something fundamental. For the first time in years, someone in my family knew who I really was. The question now was what I was going to do with that knowledge, and whether I was ready for everyone else to know too. David arrived at my apartment with enough Thai food to feed a small army, and the kind of smile that always made everything feel manageable. He took one look at my face and set the bags down on the kitchen counter without a word, pulling me into a hug that smelled like his cologne and the faint scent of the accounting firm where he worked. Okay, he said, his chin resting on top of my head. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the lunch with Victoria, about Jessica's visit to the coffee shop, about the moment when I showed my sister my bank statements and watched her entire perception of me shift in real time. David listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me work through the tangle of emotions that had been building all day. The thing is, I said, curled up on the couch with pad thai balanced on my knees, I think I always knew this moment would come eventually. I just thought I'd have more control over when and how it happened. And now I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, and I can either jump or get pushed, but I can't stay where I am anymore. David was quiet for a moment, twirling noodles around his fork. Emma, can I ask you something that might sound harsh? I nodded. What's the worst thing that happens if your family knows the truth about your success? It was a question I'd been avoiding, even in my own mind. They treat me differently. They start expecting things from me financially. They turn my wedding into some kind of performance about our family's status. Okay, and what's the worst thing that happens if they don't know? I keep living this double life. I keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I let them continue to dismiss and underestimate me. I paused. And I plan a wedding based on who they think I am instead of who I actually am. Which option feels worse? I considered this, really considered it. The second one. Definitely the second one. Then you have your answer. It sounded so simple when he said it like that, but the execution felt impossibly complicated. David, you didn't grow up with my family. You don't understand how they operate. The moment they find out about the money, everything becomes about the money. Maybe. Or maybe you're underestimating them. I'm really not. David set down his fork and turned to face me fully. Emma, I love you. And I love that you're generous and thoughtful and that you always consider other people's feelings. But sometimes I think you're so focused on managing everyone else's emotions that you forget you're allowed to have your own. The observation hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. What do you mean? I mean, you spent years building an incredible business while working full-time and going to school, and instead of celebrating that achievement, you've been hiding it because you're worried about how other people will react. You're planning our wedding around what your mother thinks you can afford instead of what we actually want. You're living in this apartment and driving that car not because you have to, but because you're afraid of what people will think if you don't. I wanted to argue with him, but I couldn't, because everything he was saying was true. I just don't want things to get complicated. Emma, they're already complicated. You're just hiding the complications instead of dealing with them. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Emma, I've been thinking about our conversation today. We need to discuss your wedding timeline. Can you come to dinner Sunday? I'm making your grandmother's mole recipe. The mention of Abuela Rosa's mole was emotional manipulation at its finest. My grandmother had passed away when I was in college, and her recipes were sacred in our family. My mother only brought them out for special occasions or when she really wanted something. What is it? David asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the text. Family dinner on Sunday. With emotional blackmail included. Are you going to go? I don't really have a choice. You think I should tell my family about the business? I think you should stop hiding who you are. Not just about the money, but about everything. You're brilliant, Emma. You're innovative and hardworking, and you've created something that most people only dream about. And you're doing yourself a disservice by pretending to be less than you are. What if they can't handle it? Then that's their problem to solve, not yours. After Victoria hung up, I sat in my dark apartment thinking about what she'd said. About making myself smaller to make other people feel bigger. About the difference between being considerate and being self-defeating. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the business plan I'd written 3 years ago, back when my company was just an idea and a hope. I read through my original mission statement: to build a sustainable business that creates value for customers while providing meaningful employment for others. Simple, honest, focused on impact rather than ego. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of that simplicity. I'd started measuring my success by whether it made other people uncomfortable instead of by whether it was making a difference. I thought about my 12 employees, scattered across the country but connected by the shared purpose of building something worthwhile. I thought about the small businesses I'd helped launch through my platform, the customers who'd sent thank you emails about products that had solved real problems for them. I thought about the impact I was having in the world, and how none of that became less valuable just because my family didn't understand it. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I spent Saturday preparing for Sunday's family dinner like I was preparing for a business presentation. I printed out financial statements, press clippings, client testimonials. I organized everything into a folder that told the story of my company's growth and impact. If I was going to reveal the truth about my success, I wanted to do it comprehensively, leaving no room for misunderstanding or dismissal. I also made another decision. I called Victoria and asked her to prepare a third proposal, something between the two options she'd already presented. Not the modest package that reflected what my family thought I could afford, and not the luxury option that reflected what I could actually afford, but something that reflected what I actually wanted. What does that look like? Victoria asked. It looks like celebrating the beginning of my marriage with the people I love most, in a way that feels authentic to who David and I are. Beautiful but not ostentatious. Meaningful but not performative. I can work with that. When do you need it? Tomorrow night. I'm telling my family about everything at dinner. Emma, are you sure you're ready for this? Number? But I'm sure I can't keep living the way I've been living. Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect Arizona weather that made people forgive the brutal summers. Clear skies, temperature in the 70s, the kind of day that belonged in vacation brochures. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that struck a balance between my usual casual style and the elevated image I was about to reveal. Dark jeans, a silk blouse, simple jewelry. Professional but not trying too hard. I drove to my parents' house in Scottsdale, my folder of documents on the passenger seat next to Victoria's 3 wedding proposals. The house looked the same as always, perfectly maintained stucco and desert landscaping, the kind of place that whispered, "successful family" to anyone driving by. My father answered the door, already dressed in his Sunday best, even though we weren't going anywhere. Robert Rodriguez was a man who had built his landscaping business from nothing, working 18-hour days for decades to create the comfortable life his family now enjoyed. He'd always been proud of his work ethic, and I'd inherited that from him, even if he didn't realize it. "Emma, Mija," he said, pulling me into a hug. "You look nice today." "Thanks, Dad." The smell of mole filled the house, rich and complex and exactly like I remembered from childhood dinners at Abuela Rosa's table. My mother had outdone herself, setting the dining room table with the good china and cloth napkins, candles flickering in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Emma!" My mother emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over her dress, her hair perfect despite having spent hours cooking. Right on time. Jessica and Marcus were already there, sitting on the couch in the living room with drinks in their hands. Jessica caught my eye and gave me a look that was equal parts supportive and nervous. She knew what I was planning to do, and I could tell she was anxious about how it would go. "So," my mother said, untying her apron, "I thought we could use dinner to really focus on your wedding planning. I've been making lists of everything we need to discuss." "Actually, Mom, there are some things I need to tell you first." Something in my tone must have caught her attention, because she paused in her bustling and looked at me directly. "What kind of things?" "Things about my life that I haven't been completely honest about." My father set down his beer. Jessica sat up straighter on the couch. Marcus looked confused, as if he was trying to figure out what kind of family drama he was about to witness. "Emma," my mother said carefully, "you're making me nervous." "I know. And I'm sorry for that. But I need you all to understand who I really am before we make any more wedding plans." I set my folder on the coffee table and opened it to the first page. 3 years ago, I started an e-commerce business. I told you it was a side project, something I was doing for extra money while I worked at the coffee shop. "Yes," my mother said slowly. "You sell things online." "I do sell things online. But it's not a side project anymore. It's a company. With employees and clients and revenue that puts it in the top tier of small businesses in Arizona." I pulled out the financial statements and handed them to my father, who had always been the numbers person in the family. He looked at the papers for a long moment, his expression moving from confusion to surprise to something that looked like shock. "Emma," he said quietly, "what am I looking at here?" "You're looking at a business that generated $3 million in revenue last year." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother reached for the papers, scanning the numbers with the intensity she usually reserved for checking restaurant bills. "This is real?" she asked. "This is real." "You're telling us you're a millionaire?" Marcus asked, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. "I'm telling you I'm a business owner. A successful one." Jessica was watching our parents' faces, and I could see her trying to gauge their reactions. My father was still staring at the financial statements, occasionally looking up at me as if he was trying to reconcile the numbers with the daughter he thought he knew. "Emma," my mother said slowly, "why didn't you tell us this before?" It was the question I'd been preparing for, but it still felt impossible to answer diplomatically, because I was afraid of how you'd react. Afraid of how we'd react to good news. Afraid of how you'd react to me being different than you thought I was. My mother set down the papers and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emma, we're your family. We want to celebrate your success." "Do you? Because when I graduated with honors, you said it was nice, but degrees don't pay the bills. When I told you I was starting a business, You asked when I was going to get serious about my career. When I mentioned hiring employees, you said it was sweet that I was helping other people avoid real jobs. The words hung in the air, and I watched my mother's face cycle through several emotions. Surprise, defensiveness, and then something that might have been recognition. I didn't mean... She started, then stopped. I know you didn't mean to be dismissive, but you were. And after a while, it became easier to just not tell you things than to deal with having them minimized or dismissed. My father cleared his throat. Emma, how long has the business been this successful? About 18 months, but it's been growing steadily for 3 years. And you've been working at the coffee shop this whole time because I like the work, and because it provided cover for not having to explain what I actually do for a living. Jessica leaned forward. Emma, show them the other stuff. I pulled out the press clippings, the client testimonials, the business awards. I walked them through the timeline of my company's growth, the challenges I'd overcome, the impact we were having in the e-commerce space. With each piece of evidence, I watched their understanding shift. This article, my mother said, holding up a piece from Entrepreneur magazine. This is about you? That's about me? 30 under 30 e-commerce success stories, she read aloud. Emma Rodriguez has built one of the most innovative dropshipping platforms in the Southwest, creating opportunities for small businesses while maintaining an ethical approach to commerce that prioritizes sustainability and fair labor practices. She looked up at me. Emma, this is incredible. Thank you. But why didn't you tell us? We could have been proud of you this whole time instead of worrying about your future. It was a fair question, and one that required a difficult answer. Because you weren't proud of me when you thought I was just a barista with a side hustle. You were worried about me, disappointed in me, constantly asking when I was going to get my act together. And I realized that your pride was conditional on my success looking a certain way. The words were harder to say than I'd expected, but they needed to be said. My mother looked stung. My father looked thoughtful. And Jessica looked like she was trying to disappear into the couch cushions. Emma, my father said carefully, we were never disappointed in you. We were worried about you. There's a difference. Is there? Because it felt the same from my perspective. My mother was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. Emma, I think I owe you an apology. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do, you're right. I have been dismissive of your choices, and I have been comparing you to Jessica in ways that weren't fair to either of you. She paused. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment by encouraging you to be realistic about your goals, but I can see now that I was actually discouraging you from pursuing them. It was more self-awareness than I'd expected, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. The thing is, I continued, this changes everything about my wedding planning. The budget constraints you've been worried about? They don't exist. The venues and vendors I can afford? They're not what you think they are. I pulled out Victoria's 3 proposals and spread them on the coffee table. These are from the wedding planner we met with. The first one is based on what you thought I could afford. The second one is based on what I can actually afford. The third one is based on what I actually want. My mother picked up the luxury proposal first, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages. Emma, this is a $120,000 wedding, which I could pay for without affecting my business or my savings. And this one? She picked up the moderate proposal. $60,000. Beautiful, elegant. Everything David and I talked about wanting. And the first one? $30,000. Nice, but not what either of us envisioned for our wedding day. My father was studying all 3 proposals, occasionally whistling under his breath at some of the details. Emma, any of these would be a beautiful wedding. I know, but they represent 3 completely different approaches to the same day. And I need to decide which one reflects who I actually am and what I actually value. What are you leaning toward? Jessica asked. The middle option. It's not about proving I can afford the most expensive wedding possible. And it's not about hiding my success to make other people comfortable. It's about celebrating the beginning of my marriage in a way that feels authentic to who David and I are. My mother was quiet, flipping through the proposals with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. Emma, I think I need to ask for your forgiveness. Mom, no, let me say this. I spent the last week worrying about how to help you plan a wedding on a budget that wouldn't embarrass the family. I called Jessica to discuss how we could contribute financially. I even considered asking your father to take money out of our retirement account to help pay for a nicer venue. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And the whole time, you were sitting there letting me worry about money you didn't need, listening to me talk about your limitations when you'd already surpassed anything I ever achieved. I don't know whether to be proud of you or embarrassed by myself. Be proud, I said. Please just be proud. I am proud. I'm so proud I don't even know how to express it. But I'm also sorry. Sorry for not seeing you clearly. Sorry for not asking the right questions. Sorry for making assumptions about your life based on what I could see instead of trusting you to tell me what was real. My father stood up and pulled me into a hug that smelled like aftershave and the outdoors. Emma, mija, you are extraordinary. And I'm sorry if we ever made you feel like you had to hide that from us. As we sat down to dinner, the atmosphere in the house felt different. Lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't realized we were all carrying had been lifted. The conversation flowed more easily, with my parents asking genuine questions about my business and my plans for the future. So what happens now? Jessica asked as we were finishing dessert. With the wedding planning, I mean. Now I plan the wedding I actually want, with a budget that reflects what I can actually afford, with people who know who I actually am, and with a family who will support whatever you decide, my mother added. Even if it's different from what we would have chosen. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still underlying dynamics that would take time to shift, still patterns of communication that would need to be rebuilt. But it was a beginning. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe fully in my parents' house. As I drove home that evening, I realized that David had been right. The truth hadn't been as devastating as I'd feared. It had been liberating. Not just for me, but for my whole family. We could finally start building relationships based on who we actually were instead of who we thought we were supposed to be. My phone rang as I was pulling into my apartment complex, Victoria's name on the screen. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I expected. They took it well. Really well, actually." "And the wedding planning?" "We're going with option 3, the authentic option." "I'm so glad to hear that. Emma, I want you to know how proud I am of you for taking this step. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me clearly when I wasn't ready to see myself clearly. That's what good consultants do. We help people become who they're meant to be." As I hung up and climbed the stairs to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement about my wedding. Not anxiety about whether it would meet other people's expectations. Not stress about budgets or logistics. Just pure excitement about celebrating the beginning of my life with David, surrounded by people who knew and loved the real me. For the first time in months, planning my wedding felt like joy instead of obligation. The morning of my second meeting with Victoria Sterling felt different than the first. I woke up early, not from anxiety this time, but from genuine excitement about planning my wedding. David had already left for work, but he'd left a note on my coffee maker. "Go get the wedding you deserve. Love you." I chose my outfit with care, but not the same careful calculation I'd used before. Today I wore a navy blazer over dark jeans, comfortable flats, and the pearl earrings from Abuela Rosa. Professional but authentic, confident but not performative. The woman walking into Sterling events today was the real Emma Rodriguez, not the version I'd been hiding behind for years. My mother was already in the waiting area when I arrived, but she looked different too. Less rigid, less performatively perfect. She was wearing a simple white blouse and khaki pants, her hair in a low ponytail, instead of her usual elaborate styling. When she saw me, she smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that felt unfamiliar but welcome. "Emma, you look lovely," she said, standing to hug me. "Thanks, Mom. How are you feeling about today?" "Nervous," she admitted, "but excited. I realized yesterday that I've never actually planned a wedding with you before. I planned a wedding for you, based on what I thought you needed, but I've never sat down and asked what you actually wanted." It was such a simple observation, but it captured something fundamental about our relationship that I'd never been able to articulate. Before I could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway of her office, and I was struck again by her presence. She looked polished and professional, but there was something warmer in her demeanor today, as if she was genuinely excited about what we were going to accomplish. "Emma, Mrs. Rodriguez, wonderful to see you both again. Please, come in." Victoria's office looked the same as before, but I experienced it differently. Instead of feeling intimidated by the elegant furnishings and wall of wedding photos, I felt inspired. These were celebrations of love and commitment, and I was here to plan my own. "So," Victoria said, settling into her chair with a genuine smile, "I understand we have some new information to work with today." My mother laughed, a sound that was lighter than I'd heard from her in years. "That's putting it mildly. It turns out my daughter has been far more successful than any of us realized." "Emma's always been good at surprising people," Victoria said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she meant more than just the business revelation. "Before we dive into the specifics," I said, "I want to be clear about what David and I actually want for our wedding day. Not what looks impressive, not what matches anyone else's expectations, but what would make us genuinely happy." Victoria pulled out a fresh notebook, pen poised. "I'm listening. We want something beautiful but not ostentatious. We want good food, good music, and an atmosphere where people can actually talk to each other and enjoy themselves. We want it to feel like a celebration, not a performance." "How many guests are you thinking?" "Around 150. Close family, good friends, people who actually matter to us." My mother was nodding along, and I could see her processing this information. "What about the ceremony itself? Church or outdoor?" "Outdoor," I said without hesitation. David and I both love being outside, and there's something about exchanging vows under the sky that appeals to us. Victoria was taking notes, but I could tell she was also thinking about logistics. "And in terms of style, formal, casual, somewhere in between." "Somewhere in between. Elegant but not stuffy. We want people to be comfortable, but we also want it to feel special." "What about timing? What season? What time of day?" "Spring, probably late afternoon." We love the idea of a ceremony at sunset and a reception under the stars. As we talked through the details, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't during our first meeting. This felt like collaboration instead of negotiation, like we were all working toward the same goal instead of managing competing agendas. "Emma," Victoria said, "based on what you're describing, I think the proposal I put together for you is going to be exactly what you're looking for. But before I show it to you, I want to tell you something." She set down her pen and looked directly at me. "When you first came in here last week, I recognized you immediately. But I couldn't figure out how to handle the situation without violating your privacy or putting you in an awkward position with your family." My mother looked confused. "You two know each other?" "We do," I said. "Victoria helped me build my business. 3 years ago, when I was just getting started, she was my consultant." "More than that," Victoria corrected. "Emma was one of my most dedicated clients. She asked thoughtful questions, implemented every suggestion, and worked harder than almost anyone I've ever consulted with. When her business started taking off, I wasn't surprised at all." My mother was staring at Victoria with a mixture of surprise and something that looked like gratitude. "You helped her build the company?" "I provided guidance and support, but Emma did all the work. She had the vision, the determination, and the business acumen. I just helped her refine her strategy." "What was she like?" my mother asked. "As a client, I mean." Victoria smiled. "Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. She would come to our meetings with detailed questions about everything from customer acquisition costs to supply chain logistics. She never took shortcuts, never looked for easy answers. Everything she built thoughtfully and ethically." I felt heat creep up my neck. "Victoria, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because Emma, your family deserves to understand not just how successful you've become, but how you became successful. The kind of person it takes to build what you've built." She turned back to my mother. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughter is remarkable. She's created something that most people only dream about, and she's done it while maintaining her values, and taking care of the people who work for her. You should be incredibly proud." My mother was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. "I am proud. I'm just sorry it took me so long to understand what I should be proud of." Victoria pulled out a bound presentation and slid it across the desk. "This is what I've put together based on our conversation and what I know about Emma's preferences." I opened the proposal and immediately understood why Victoria had looked so confident. The venue was perfect, a boutique resort in Paradise Valley with gardens that looked like something out of a fairy tale. The ceremony would take place in a natural amphitheater surrounded by desert landscaping, with the reception in an adjacent courtyard under string lights and desert stars. The details were exactly what David and I had talked about wanting: a menu that featured locally sourced ingredients and options for different dietary restrictions, a small band that specialized in acoustic covers of contemporary songs, flowers that complemented the natural desert setting instead of competing with it, photography that focused on candid moments rather than staged poses. "Victoria, this is perfect," I said, flipping through the pages. "How did you know?" "Because I pay attention. And because I remember the conversations we had about your values and priorities when you were building your business. You wanted to create something sustainable and authentic, and I thought your wedding should reflect those same principles." My mother was looking over my shoulder at the proposal, and I could see her taking in the details. "Emma, this is beautiful. It's elegant but not pretentious. It feels like you." "What do you think about the budget?" I asked, knowing this was still a sensitive area for her. She looked at the final page and was quiet for a moment. "I think it's exactly what this kind of wedding should cost. It's not wasteful, but it's not cutting corners either. It's investing in quality in all the right places." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Victoria said, "can I ask you something?" My mother nodded. "What kind of role would you like to play in the wedding planning, now that we all understand the real parameters?" It was a question I hadn't thought to ask, but I realized it was important. For the past week, my mother had been operating under the assumption that she needed to guide and protect me through the wedding planning process. Now that dynamic had shifted completely. "I want to help in whatever way Emma wants me to help," my mother said carefully. "I realize now that I've been trying to plan the wedding I thought she should have instead of helping her plan the wedding she actually wants." "What would be most helpful to you, Emma?" Victoria asked. I thought about it. "I'd love your help with the details, Mom. You have great taste, and you know how to coordinate complex events. But I want to make the big decisions with David, and I want to feel like you're supporting our choices instead of trying to change them." "That sounds perfect," my mother said. "I promise to ask what you want instead of telling you what you should want." Victoria was taking notes again, and I could see her putting together a planning timeline in her head. "Emma, when are you thinking of having the wedding?" "We were hoping for May. Is that too soon?" "May is perfect for outdoor events in Arizona. The weather will be ideal." Victoria flipped through her calendar. "I have 2 Saturdays available in May, the 14th and the 21st. David and I had talked about this. The 21st. It's the weekend after David's busy season ends at work, so he'll be able to actually enjoy the planning process. May 21st it is." Victoria made a note. "That gives us about 3.5 months to coordinate everything, which is tight but absolutely doable." For the next hour, we worked through logistics with an efficiency that felt almost magical. Victoria had vendor recommendations for everything from florists to musicians, all of whom she'd worked with before and trusted. My mother contributed ideas about timeline and coordination, drawing on her experience with Jessica's wedding but adapting everything to our different vision and values. "What about your dress?" my mother asked as we were finishing up. "Have you given any thought to what you want?" I had been dreading this conversation, knowing it would inevitably lead to comparisons with Jessica's elaborate gown and the awkward budget discussions we'd had before. "I want something simple and elegant. Classic, but not trendy. Something that feels like me." "What's your budget for the dress?" Victoria asked. I glanced at my mother, then back at Victoria. I was thinking around $3,000, enough to get something really beautiful, but not so much that I feel ridiculous about spending it on one day. My mother was quiet for a moment. "Emma, can I make a suggestion?" I nodded, bracing myself. There's a designer in Scottsdale, Elena Morales, who creates the most beautiful custom gowns. She's not cheap, but she's not astronomical either. Jessica looked at her work when she was dress shopping, but decided to go with Vera Wang for the name recognition. What are her prices like? For a custom gown, probably around $5,000. But Emma, the work is exquisite. And she really listens to what her clients want instead of trying to talk them into her vision. It was more than I'd been planning to spend, but well within my budget. More importantly, it was the first time my mother had made a suggestion that felt like it was based on what I might actually want, rather than what she thought I should want. That sounds perfect. Can you set up an appointment? I'll call her this afternoon. Victoria closed her notebook and smiled. I think we have a solid foundation here. Emma, I'll get contracts drawn up for the venue and the major vendors. Mrs. Rodriguez, if you'd like to coordinate with me on the smaller details, I think that would be a great division of labor. As we walked toward the elevator, my mother was quieter than usual. In the parking garage, she stopped by her car and turned to face me. Emma, I owe you another apology. Mom, you already apologized. We're good. No, this is different. I've been thinking about last week's meeting. About how I talked about you in front of Victoria. About how I made assumptions about what you could afford, and what you understood about quality and presentation. She paused, looking down at her keys. I've been treating you like you were incapable of making good decisions, like you needed me to guide you through every aspect of your life. And the truth is, you've been making better decisions than any of us realized. You've built something incredible while I was worrying about whether you could afford a decent wedding dress. Mom, let me finish. I think I've been so focused on protecting you from disappointment that I stopped seeing your actual capabilities. And that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to our relationship. It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard my mother say, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. I want to do better, Emma. I want to support the person you actually are instead of trying to manage the person I thought you were. I'd like that too. She hugged me then, a real hug that felt different from the polite embraces we usually exchanged. When she pulled back, she was smiling. Now let's go plan you a wedding that's worthy of the remarkable woman you've become. As I drove home, I called David to update him on the meeting. He was in his car, heading to a client appointment, but I could hear the smile in his voice when I described Victoria's proposal. It sounds perfect, Em. Exactly what we talked about wanting. Are you okay with the budget? It's more than we originally discussed. Emma, we could afford 10 weddings this expensive. I'm okay with spending money on something that will make us both happy. What about your parents? Should we run the plans by them? David's parents lived in Seattle and had a much more laid-back approach to wedding planning than my family. They'd already told us they were excited to celebrate with us however we wanted to celebrate. I'll send them the proposal, but they'll be thrilled. They've been worried that your family was pressuring you into something more elaborate than you wanted. It was funny how different families could have such different concerns about the same event. David, I need to tell you something. What's that? I'm actually excited about our wedding now. For the first time since we got engaged, I'm excited instead of anxious. I'm so glad to hear that. You deserve to be excited about marrying me. I'm excited about marrying you. I was just anxious about everything else. And now? Now it feels like we're planning a celebration instead of navigating a minefield. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Victoria's proposal spread out in front of me, making notes about the details I wanted to discuss with David. For the first time in months, wedding planning felt creative instead of stressful. I was choosing vendors based on their work and our preferences, not based on what we could afford or what would meet other people's expectations. My phone rang around 8. Jessica's name on the screen. Hey Jess, Mom called me about your meeting today. She sounds happier than I've heard her in months. It went really well. We're finally all on the same page about what kind of wedding David and I actually want. Emma, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you mad at me? About the way I reacted when you told me about the business? I thought about it. No, I'm not mad. You reacted the way anyone would react to finding out someone they thought they knew was completely different than they'd imagined. But I should have seen it. I should have paid more attention to what you were actually doing, instead of making assumptions based on what I could see. Jessica, we all make assumptions about the people closest to us. It's human nature. Maybe, but I want to do better. I want to actually know my sister instead of just thinking I know her. I'd like that too. Good. Because I have a question about your wedding. Okay. Do you want me to throw you a bachelorette party? A real one. Not some generic night out, but something that actually reflects who you are and what you'd enjoy? The offer caught me off guard. Jessica had never shown much interest in my preferences before, mainly because she'd assumed my preferences were limited by my budget and circumstances. What did you have in mind? I don't know yet. That's why I'm asking what you'd actually want. Spa weekend? Adventure trip? Something completely different? I smiled, realizing that this was what it felt like to have family members actually consider my preferences, instead of projecting their own assumptions onto me. Can I think about it and get back to you? Of course. Take your time. This is about you, not about what I think a bachelorette party should look like. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been hiding my success and planning a wedding based on what other people thought I could afford. Now I was working with a vendor I trusted, supported by family members who actually knew who I was, planning a celebration that reflected my actual values and preferences. It wasn't a perfect transformation. There were still dynamics to navigate, still conversations to have, still moments when old patterns would probably resurface. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward as myself, instead of as some smaller, safer version of myself. My laptop chimed with an email from Victoria. The subject line read, "Your perfect wedding timeline." I opened it to find a detailed month-by-month breakdown of everything we needed to accomplish between now and May 21st. Venue contracts, vendor meetings, dress fittings, menu tastings, invitation design. It was comprehensive but not overwhelming, organized but not rigid. At the bottom of the email, Victoria had added a personal note. "Emma, it has been such a joy to watch you step into your full self this week. Your wedding is going to be beautiful because it's going to be authentically you. I can't wait to help you bring it to life." I closed my laptop and looked around my small apartment, thinking about the life I'd built here, the business I'd grown from my kitchen table, the relationships I'd maintained despite the complications, the quiet satisfaction of creating something meaningful without needing external validation. In a few months, David and I would be married, surrounded by people who knew and loved the real us. We'd celebrate under the Arizona stars, dance to music we actually enjoyed, eat food that reflected our values, and begin our married life from a foundation of authenticity instead of performance. For the first time in my adult life, everything felt aligned. My personal life, my professional life, my family relationships, and my future plans all reflected the same person, Emma Rodriguez, business owner, future wife, and finally, completely herself. The weeks leading up to the wedding unfolded with a smoothness I hadn't dared to expect. Each vendor meeting, each tasting, each fitting felt like a celebration rather than an obligation. Victoria had been right about Elena Morales, the dress designer my mother had recommended. When I walked into her studio in Old Town Scottsdale, I knew immediately that this was where my wedding dress would come to life. Elena was a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades creating beauty from fabric. Her studio was filled with natural light and bolts of silken lace that looked like they'd been chosen by someone who understood the difference between expensive and exquisite. "Tell me about your wedding," she said, settling into a chair across from me with a cup of tea and a sketch pad. I found myself describing not just the venue and the style, but the feeling I wanted to create. The sense of authenticity and joy. The celebration of beginning something new while honoring who we already were. Elena nodded as I spoke, occasionally making small sketches on her pad. "What do you want to feel like when you put on your dress?" "Like myself, but the best version of myself. Confident and beautiful, but not like I'm wearing a costume." She showed me her sketches, and I felt my breath catch. The design was perfect. Clean lines that would flatter my figure. delicate lace details that added elegance without overwhelming the silhouette. A train that was dramatic enough to feel special but not so long that I'd trip over it during the ceremony. "This is exactly what I had in mind," I told her. "Good. Because this dress is going to be made specifically for you, for your body and your wedding and your joy. When you walk down that aisle, you'll be wearing something that was created just for this moment." The fitting process became something I looked forward to, rather than dreaded. Elena worked with the precision of an artist and the warmth of a friend, adjusting each seam until the dress felt like it had been designed by someone who knew me intimately. During our final fitting, 2 weeks before the wedding, she stepped back and smiled. "Emma, you look radiant. This dress was meant for you." I turned to look at myself in the mirror and felt tears well up in my eyes. The woman looking back at me was confident, elegant, and completely authentic. This was who I was going to be on my wedding day. Not a version of myself designed to meet other people's expectations, but simply myself, celebrated and supported. "Elena, it's perfect. Thank you for creating something so beautiful. Thank you for trusting me to be part of your story." The final week before the wedding brought a flurry of activity that somehow never felt overwhelming. Victoria had orchestrated everything with the skill of a conductor leading a symphony. Vendors confirmed their timelines, the weather forecast promised a perfect Arizona evening, and RSVPs had come in from nearly everyone we'd invited. David and I spent the Wednesday before our Saturday wedding having dinner at our favorite restaurant in Tempe, the little Mexican place where we'd had our first official date 3 years earlier. It felt important to ground ourselves in our own story before the celebration began. "Are you nervous?" he asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. "About marrying you? Not at all. About having everyone we love in one place? Watching us promise to build a life together? A little bit, but in a good way. I keep thinking about how different this feels from how I thought wedding planning would be. Different how? I expected it to be stressful and complicated and full of compromise. Instead, it's been one of the most joyful experiences we've had together. Every decision has brought us closer to exactly what we want." He was right. Instead of wedding planning driving us apart or creating tension, it had become a way of deepening our understanding of what we valued and how we wanted to live our lives together. "David, can I tell you something that might sound strange? Always. I'm grateful for everything that happened with my family. All the misunderstandings and assumptions and difficult conversations. Because it forced me to figure out who I really am and what I actually want, instead of just going along with what other people expected." That doesn't sound strange at all. It sounds like growth. I just keep thinking about how different this wedding would have been if I'd never told them about the business. We probably would have had a nice ceremony that checked all the right boxes but didn't really reflect who we are. And instead, we're having a wedding that feels like us. Completely, authentically us. Friday arrived with the kind of clear desert sky that made Arizona famous. I woke up early, not from anxiety but from excitement that felt almost childlike in its purity. Today was the rehearsal, and tomorrow was our wedding day. The rehearsal took place at the resort in Paradise Valley, and seeing our ceremony site for the first time with all the details in place took my breath away. The natural amphitheater was even more beautiful than I'd imagined, with the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the desert landscape. Victoria had worked with the florist to create arrangements that complemented rather than competed with the natural setting, and the result was breathtaking. Our families mingled easily during the rehearsal, and I watched my parents talking with David's parents about everything from business to travel to their hopes for our future. The conversation was warm and genuine, without any of the performative quality that had characterized so many family gatherings in the past. "Emma," my mother said, pulling me aside as we were wrapping up, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. Not just for the business or the wedding planning, but for having the courage to be yourself, even when it was difficult." "Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me. I also want to apologize again for not seeing you clearly sooner. I realize now that I was so focused on protecting you from disappointment that I couldn't see how capable you already were." "We're here now," I said, squeezing her hand. "That's what matters." The rehearsal dinner was exactly what David and I had hoped for. Relaxed, intimate, and focused on the people we loved rather than on impressing anyone. We'd chosen a small restaurant in Scottsdale that served incredible food in a casual atmosphere, and the evening felt like a celebration among friends, rather than a formal family obligation. Victoria pulled me aside as the evening was winding down. "Emma, everything is set for tomorrow. The weather is going to be perfect, all the vendors are confirmed, and your dress is hanging in the bridal suite waiting for you. Victoria, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. Not just the wedding planning, but for helping me have the courage to be honest about who I am. Emma, you did that yourself. I just provided a safe space for you to make the choice. Still, I don't think this would have been possible without your support. Well, tomorrow you get to see the result of all that courage. And I think it's going to be magical." Quote, "Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect weather that seemed designed specifically for outdoor weddings. I woke up in the bridal suite at the resort, surrounded by my bridesmaids and feeling a sense of calm anticipation that surprised me. Jessica was there, along with Maya from the coffee shop and 2 college friends who had flown in from out of state. The energy in the room was relaxed and joyful, without any of the frantic energy I'd seen in so many wedding movies. "How are you feeling?" Jessica asked as she helped me into my dress. "Perfect," I said, and meant it. "I feel completely ready." The dress fit exactly as Elena had promised it would, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw exactly who I wanted to be on my wedding day. Confident, elegant, authentically myself. My mother arrived just as I was putting on my jewelry, carrying a small box that I recognized from Abuela Rosa's bedroom. "I wanted you to have something of hers with you today," she said, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold bracelet. She always said this would go to whichever granddaughter needed it most on her wedding day. I felt tears threaten to spill over as she fastened the bracelet around my wrist. "Mom, it's beautiful. She would have been so proud of you, Emma. Of the woman you've become, of the life you've built, of the choices you've made." "I hope so. I know so." As the afternoon progressed, I could feel the excitement building throughout the resort. Guests were arriving, the musicians were setting up, and Victoria was orchestrating everything with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. An hour before the ceremony, Victoria knocked on the door of the bridal suite. "Emma, there's someone here to see you." I opened the door to find David standing in the hallway, looking impossibly handsome in his navy suit, and slightly nervous in a way that made my heart flutter. "I know we're not supposed to see each other before the ceremony," he said, "but I wanted to give you something." He handed me a small envelope with my name written in his careful handwriting. Inside was a card with a photo of us from our second date, laughing at something that had made us both double over with giggles. "Emma," the card read, "3 years ago, you told me about your dreams for your business and your life, and I knew I wanted to be part of whatever you built. Today, I get to promise to support those dreams and build new ones with you. Thank you for being brave enough to show me who you really are. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life loving all of you." I felt tears well up in my eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "David, it's perfect. Thank you. See you at the altar, future Mrs. Kim." As the sun began to set over the desert, casting the entire landscape in golden light, I knew it was time. Victoria appeared at my side with a smile that seemed to say everything would be perfect. "Are you ready, Emma?" I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The music began, and I watched my bridesmaids walk down the aisle ahead of me, each one radiant in the soft evening light. Then the musicians shifted to the song David and I had chosen for my entrance, and I saw him standing at the altar with an expression of pure joy on his face. As I walked down the aisle, I was aware of our families and friends on either side of me, but my focus was entirely on David. This man who had supported my dreams, celebrated my successes, and loved me exactly as I was. This man I was about to promise to love and support and build a life with. When I reached the altar, he took my hands and whispered, "You look absolutely beautiful." "You clean up pretty well yourself," I whispered back, and we both started laughing. The ceremony itself was everything we had hoped it would be. Personal, meaningful, and focused on the promises we were making to each other. rather than on putting on a show for anyone else. We'd written our own vows, and when it came time to speak them, I felt completely present and completely myself. "David," I said, looking into his eyes, "3 years ago, you saw something in me that I was still learning to see in myself. You believed in my dreams before I had the courage to pursue them fully. And you loved me exactly as I was while encouraging me to become everything I could be. Today, I promise to do the same for you, to support your dreams, to celebrate your successes, to love you through challenges, and to build something beautiful with you that's bigger than either of us could create alone." When David spoke his vows, his voice was steady but emotional. "Emma, you are the strongest, most authentic person I know. You've built something incredible while staying true to your values, and you've shown me what it looks like to live with integrity and courage. Today, I promise to love you not just for who you are now, but for who you're still becoming. I promise to support your dreams, to celebrate your achievements, and to be your partner in everything we build together." When the officiant pronounced us married and David kissed me, the applause from our families and friends felt like a celebration of not just our union, but of the journey that had brought us to this moment. The reception that followed was exactly what we had envisioned. Good food, great music, and an atmosphere where people could actually talk to each other and enjoy themselves. Our guests mingled easily, sharing stories and laughter under the desert stars. During dinner, Victoria appeared at our table with a champagne flute in her hand and a smile that seemed to encompass everything we'd accomplished together. "Emma and David," she said, raising her glass, "I want to make a toast to a couple who proved that the best weddings happen when people have the courage to celebrate exactly who they are." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude for this woman who had helped me find the courage to be myself. As the evening progressed, I found myself having conversations with family members that felt deeper and more genuine than any we'd had in years. My father told me how proud he was of the business I'd built and asked thoughtful questions about my plans for expansion. My mother talked about how much she'd learned about event planning from working with Victoria, and expressed interest in maybe pursuing it as a hobby. Jessica pulled me aside during one of the slower songs. "Emma, I just wanted to tell you that this wedding is perfect. It's elegant and beautiful, but it feels completely like you and David." "Thank you, Jess. That means a lot coming from you. I also wanted to apologize again for not seeing who you really were sooner. Watching you tonight, seeing how confident and happy you are, I realize how much I missed by making assumptions about your life." "We're family," I said, hugging her. "We have time to figure out how to really know each other." "I'd like that." As the night began to wind down, David and I found ourselves on the terrace overlooking the desert, stealing a quiet moment together before saying goodbye to our guests. "So, Mrs. Kim," he said, pulling me close, "how does it feel to be married?" "It feels exactly right," I said, leaning into his warmth. "Like everything we went through to get here was worth it." "Even the complicated family stuff?" "Especially the complicated family stuff. Because it forced me to figure out who I really am and what I actually want, instead of just going along with what was expected." "And what do you want?" "I want to build a life with you that's as authentic and joyful as today was. I want to keep growing my business and supporting the people who work for me. I want to have honest relationships with my family based on who we actually are, instead of who we think we should be." Those all sound like excellent goals for a marriage. As our guests began to say their goodbyes, I felt overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding us. These were people who knew us, really knew us, and who were celebrating not just our wedding but our courage to be ourselves. Victoria was one of the last to leave, and when she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Emma, this was one of the most beautiful weddings I've ever had the privilege to plan. Not because of the flowers or the venue, but because it was so completely authentic to who you are. Thank you for everything, Victoria. For believing in me when I wasn't ready to believe in myself. Thank you for trusting me to be part of your story." As David and I finally made our way to the honeymoon suite, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been hiding my success and planning a wedding based on what other people thought I could afford. Tonight, I was married to the man I loved, surrounded by family and friends who knew and celebrated the real me, having had the wedding that perfectly reflected our values and dreams. "David," I said as we walked hand in hand through the resort gardens. I want to remember this feeling forever. What feeling? The feeling of being completely myself and completely loved at the same time. Emma, that's not just a wedding day feeling. That's what our marriage is going to be like every day. Promise? I promise. As we reached our suite, I took one last look back at the reception area, now quiet except for the staff cleaning up. Tomorrow, we would leave for our honeymoon in Sedona, and when we returned, we would begin our married life with a foundation of authenticity and mutual support that felt unshakable. But tonight, I wanted to savor this feeling of having had the courage to be myself and having been celebrated for it, of having planned a wedding that reflected our actual values instead of other people's expectations, of having built relationships with my family based on honesty instead of performance. 6 months ago, my mother had told a wedding planner that I didn't understand quality or presentation, that I needed guidance because I didn't know how to make good choices. Tonight, that same wedding planner had told our wedding guests that we had proven the best celebrations happen when people have the courage to be exactly who they are. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. But it had been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of uncertainty, every choice to be honest instead of comfortable. As David and I finally closed the door to our suite, I realized that this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, we would start building our life together as married partners. I would continue growing my business, supporting my employees, and creating value in the world. We would navigate the ongoing complexities of family relationships with honesty and compassion. We would face whatever challenges came our way with the confidence that came from knowing and accepting ourselves completely. But tonight, we were exactly where we belonged, together, authentic, and surrounded by love that was based on truth rather than pretense. Tonight, we had everything we needed to build the life we'd always dreamed of, starting with the foundation of being completely ourselves. The wedding was over, but the marriage and the life we were going to build together was just beginning. And it was going to be beautiful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.